Welcome back to Robbie Minds. Now, growing up in Nigeria, the media was all about the traditional media. So you're thinking the television, the radio, you're thinking about the print media, the newspapers, the magazines. But over the past decade, especially with the explosion, the adoption of broadband internet, we've seen the meteoric rise of online media, blogs, podcasts, different news outlets have popped up on the internet. And while some of the traditional media outlets have found their way in that online space, we have a new brand of journalism. I'm talking about people like you and me holding mobile phones, becoming citizen journalists. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of people with their smartphones. Something happens, the first thing they do is to record it, put it up on the internet, and before you know it, that's news. Now, what are the implications with all this recording? Do we have code guiding them? What about the question of ethics? Now, to discuss this and more, I have with me the program manager at Witness, Nkem Agunwa. So that you're the Africa program manager at Witness. Right. So tell me, in your experience, how has the smartphone technology changed the face of journalism?
Thank you so much for having me. I think that is such an important question. It has completely transformed the face of journalism. Like you did say it yourself, citizen journalism. We now have citizen journalists. You and I, anyone really can, with a snap of a button, film incidents that are newsworthy, including incidents of rights violations or just very important happenings around them, and record that in real time, and also with the power of social media, distribute that as well in real time. So we see that the traditional gatekeepers are completely taken off. And I think that it has really built people power. It's also allowed people to understand that their voices count, their voices matter, and they can use the devices in their hands to shine the spotlight on issues that have before now been relegated to the background.
But I'm sure you've come across instances where somebody brings out a mobile phone and they're abused, they're fought, they're injured, and it becomes a problem. How much has this deterred citizens from bringing out their mobile phones to record vital evidence that is also newsworthy?
I think this has deterred quite significantly. One thing that we always push for is, if it is not safe to document, to film, do not do that. So the mobile camera in some ways is a shield, but at the same time, it could introduce some vulnerabilities. We've seen instances where the perpetrators, once you pull out a phone camera, it immediately agitates them, and it could put you in immediate danger. It could also cause you to be targeted, right? And so the idea is not for you to film and completely lose your safety, or there's a threat to your life. Is that you're able to film, and the visual evidence can be used for justice and accountability mechanisms. We also put out ways in which you can do this safely, and also to do it ethically. So we always recommend that it has to be safe first, and then film from a distance. You don't have to be super close to the incident to be able to document what's going on. You could film and narrate what you're seeing, right? And we also caution that when you do that, ensure that you do not infuse your biases, because that completely compromises the evidence that you're trying to document. And it's also important to note that you do not always have to film when the incident is going on. You can come back later, and there are still critical pieces of evidence that you can film after the violation might have happened.
Yeah, I'm just listening to you. I'm reflecting on some of the newsworthy things that I see online, and it brings up the question, like you just touched on ethics. So when you have children involved, where there's nudity involved, or even when it's a very sensitive case, for example, someone trying to take their life, trying to jump off a bridge, and the next thing you see is people bringing out mobile phones. Can you speak to us more around the ethics of this citizen journalism?
It is a critical issue. While we have the right to document, because that is part of our fundamental human rights, particularly the right to freedom of expression, we also have a responsibility to ensure that when we film, we do not cause harm. We have a duty to do no harm, right? And that could include that first, before you film, where possible, administer an informed consent. People have to consent that you have them in your footage. There are ways to film an incident without recording distinct identifiable features in people, right? There are ways to film vulnerable communities, for example, because you must ensure that you do not re-traumatize the survivors, that you do not expose a community that's already being targeted to further violations. So these are things that must be carefully considered. And also we have to be active bystanders. It can't be that there is something happening where someone is in grave danger and the first instinct is to pull out your phone. If you can help, if it is safe for you to provide other forms of support, then that should be the first consideration over and above every other considerations. In some instances, the best decision in that moment is to film because you do not have the agency to provide any form of support. But you can film to bear witness that that violation happened with the hope that accountability can be brought.
Earlier on, you mentioned how traditional media, radio, television, newspapers, magazines have been the gatekeepers, but now we've seen citizen journalists come to the scene. Do you see potential for a convergence where instead of one being the gatekeeper and the other not being so much a gatekeeper, it's all these different forms of media all working together?
I think that should be it. It's where citizen journalists can't replace traditional journalism, right? Both play very significant roles in the society, and there should be a convergence. With citizen journalism, unfortunately, we do not have guardrails. There are no regulation. It is not standardized. So the people still rely on traditional media outfits for the confirmation of the information that they receive from citizen journalists. And I do know that traditional media as well, in some cases, rely on citizen journalists as sources. So I really see that there is a situation where it should be a relationship that is complementary. We all really need each other, and it should be a conversation of how do we create systems by which we could work together and not systems where both compete amongst each other.
I'll take you back to that answer about the lack of guardrails. So you don't really have, like, say, on television, there's a code, and if you violate the code, there are punishments, right? A citizen journalist brings out their phone, they record anything, and there's almost no implication. Now, doesn't that run the risk of having people with vested interest to plant people and use the citizen journalism media as a form to push certain propaganda?
I think that the issue of propaganda has been one that has been with us since arguably humanity. There's always been people who are trying to skew narratives, trying to influence people's decisions from the time of even before photography and before media as we know it to be today. And so today's time is not different with citizen journalism and with different forms of media manipulation that allows that to happen more seamlessly. I think that what is important to note is with every phenomenon, there is the upside and there is the downside. There's been tremendous benefit to having people like you and I have devices in their hands that they can film and document violations where they happen. And a number of citizen journalists or frontline defenders risk their lives in the most dangerous situations in order to uncover critical evidence of rights violations. And so I think that we have to find ways in which we can leverage that. How do we build support from the community level in ways that citizen journalists understand how to do this and how to do this effectively, how to do it ethically, and more importantly, how they can do this safely?
And just listening to your answer, you said the immense benefits. So, are there clear examples where citizen journalism has made a huge difference, whether it's in a case, whether it's in raising awareness? Share with us.
I think there's been so many examples to demonstrate that, even when we go down to just the beginning of smartphones and cameras everywhere. So I will give you one example. A number of us might be familiar with the Alufo killing, the unfortunate killing of the young men in Rivers State. And I remember at the time I received it on my BlackBerry phone. It was distressing, but it was there. And those footage were relied on in the court of law to reach justice, right? The perpetrators were held accountable, and the judge specifically relied on the relevance of that visual evidence in order to hold the perpetrators accountable. We might also remember the Elisha Abo incident. So this was not a citizen video. It was a CCTV, but there again, we also see that it was relied on by the judge to grant compensation to the applicant. In this case, it was Womet, and she was awarded 50 million. Recently, we saw the Judicial Panel of Inquiry here in Lagos State relying on visual evidence from the NSAS protest to award compensation to specifically Felicia Opara. So there are many instances where visual evidence documented by ordinary people on the streets have been relied on in the court of law to reach justice. But we also know that the court of law is not the only mechanism for accountability. There's been different ways where campaigners have used video evidence to advocate to policymakers to cause a change in policies. So it's such a powerful tool that I think that we have to continue to leverage.
Yeah, and how has the government reacted to this, this online technology, citizen journalism? And are you expectant of maybe legislation around this, code, the regulation? And that would be my final question.
Well, I could stay here longer if you wanted. Unfortunately, there's been a clampdown on citizen journalism. We've had instances where people have been arrested because they may not necessarily have been the creators of the video, but they distributed it on social media. Some people have had trumped up charges against them, but our laws actually protect the right for us to film law enforcement agents in the course of their work. And the right to record is a right that is protected, and is a right that ensures that there's transparency, there's accountability. We really would want the government to really protect this right, to see that when there is a free society, when people can express themselves, including through visual evidence, we have a progressive society. We have an accountable society. So that's what I would want to see.
Thank you very much, Nkem Agunwa, Africa Program Manager at Witness. Thank you for being our guest on Robin Minds.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.